In today's lecture, we're going to look at pronoun-antecedent agreement. However, before we look at this specific grammatical error, it may be beneficial to go back and review subject-verb agreement quickly, as both of these errors deal with agreement. In our last lecture, we looked at subject-verb agreement, and we found out that our subject must agree with our verb. If we have a singular subject, we must have a singular verb form. Similarly, if we have a plural subject, we must have a plural verb form. Verbs are singular when they end in s, and verbs are plural if they do not end in s. Subject-verb agreement has a very specific process that we followed in our last lecture. Our first step when identifying subject-verb agreement problems is to find our verb. We then need to ask who or what the verb in order to find our subject. Next, we look for prepositional phrases, and it's important to remember that our subject cannot be within a prepositional phrase. And lastly, we need to ensure that the subject and the verb agree. Remember that S is singular for verbs. Finally, keep in mind that there, T-H-E-R-E, can never be our subject. So let's quickly examine a sample sentence for subject-verb agreement. At the next table was an elderly man and his grandchildren. So our first step is to find our verb. The verb in this sentence is was. Next, we must ask ourselves who or what the verb. So who or what was? The answer to this question will give us the subject of our sentence. However, before we can go further, we should identify any prepositional phrases. Looking at this sentence, we should be able to identify the word at as a preposition. Prepositional phrases begin with a preposition and end with a noun. So the next noun within the sentence would be table. Therefore, we know that everything from at to table is within a prepositional phrase, and our subject cannot be any of these words. That only leaves man and grandchildren as potential subjects for this sentence. We next need to analyze whether we have a singular or a plural subject. We have an elderly man and his grandchildren. Therefore, we have a plural subject. Next, we need to identify whether our verb is singular or plural. Would was be considered singular or plural? Was, since it ends in an S, would be considered singular. Therefore, it does not agree with the subject of this sentence, and we need to change was to were. Now that we have reviewed subject-verb agreement, let's move on to pronoun-antecedent agreement. From our very first lecture, you will remember Bob. Bob, as a word, is a noun because Bob is a person. However, we can also refer to Bob by the term he. He would be considered a pronoun. The formal definition of a pronoun is a word that can stand in for a noun. So now that we know what a pronoun is, we can also know what an antecedent is. An antecedent is the word that the pronoun stands in for. So Bob would be considered the antecedent. Now that we can identify pronouns and antecedents, let's look at a few common pronouns that we'll be very familiar with. Words such as he, him, she, her, they, them, you, it, and I, me are all considered pronouns. As with subjects and verbs, pronouns and antecedents must agree with one another. For instance, if we have the singular masculine antecedent Bob, we need to make sure that the pronoun is also singular and masculine, he or him. If we have an antecedent that is singular and feminine, we need to make sure that the pronoun we use is also singular, and feminine. If our antecedent is plural, such as in the word friends, we need to make sure that our pronoun is also plural, as in they and them. Let's look at an example. We have the following two sentences. Terry went to the store, they bought milk. Let's begin analyzing this sentence by identifying our pronoun. Looking through the sentence, we should be able to identify they as a pronoun. What is they referring back to? They appears to be referring to Terry. However, there seems to be a slight issue. Terry, as a noun, is singular, whereas they is plural. Therefore, they cannot be the correct pronoun, and instead we must use he. This example may seem relatively easy because it's dealing with pronouns that we are all very familiar with. However, there are additional pronouns that are a little bit more complicated because these pronouns, in addition to being pronouns, can also be antecedents. For instance, the words both, few, several, and many are all plural antecedents that can also be pronouns. We also have a long list of singular antecedents. While this list may look daunting to begin with, it can be organized relatively easily. We need to remember each, either, and neither. But then we need to remember that anything that ends in one and anything that ends in body is also a pronoun and singular. So let's look at an example sentence to see how this new context in which pronouns can be both the antecedent and the pronoun functions. Let's examine the sentence, everyone should be sure that they have a retirement account. Within this sentence, try to identify the pronouns. Looking through this sentence, we should be able to identify they as a pronoun, but we also have everyone as a pronoun. In fact, they appears to be referring back to everyone. However, this creates a small issue. Everyone, as we have just learned, ends in one and is therefore singular. However, they is plural. Therefore, the pronoun and the antecedent within this sentence do not agree. Let's attempt to fix this issue with pronoun-antecedent agreement by changing they to he. Everyone should be sure that he has a retirement account. However, in using the masculine form he, we are eliminating half of the population, as everyone also includes women. Therefore, he cannot be used as our pronoun. So how do we begin to fix this error with pronoun-antecedent agreement? There are actually two different ways that we can fix this issue. The first method is by making the pronoun singular, but also adding she. Everyone should be sure that he or she has a retirement account. This example includes both genders and therefore is not sexist. We could also fix this issue by making our antecedent plural. Something along the lines of all employees should be sure that they have a retirement account also fixes the error, as employees and they are both plural. Let's take a look at another example sentence. In the sentence, it is the most traumatic experience that anyone will encounter in their lives. As with the previous example, let's begin by identifying our pronoun. Within this sentence, we should be able to identify their as a pronoun, but we also have an additional pronoun in anyone. As we just learned, anyone is singular and their is plural. Therefore, this pronoun and its antecedent do not agree. As with the previous example sentence, there are two methods by which we can fix this error. We can again make the pronoun singular but add her as well, or we can make the antecedent plural. It is the most traumatic experience that anyone will encounter in his or her life, or it is the most traumatic experience that individuals will encounter in their lives. Let's look at one final example sentence. Every hunter should be sure that their guns are safely locked away. Let's begin by identifying our pronoun. Within the sentence, the pronoun is their. We now need to identify our antecedent. So what is their referring to? Their is referring back to the antecedent hunter. Now let's begin analyzing to see whether our antecedent agrees with our pronoun. Hunter is singular, and their is plural. Therefore, our pronoun and our antecedent do not agree. As with the previous examples, there are two ways to fix this issue. We can have every hunter should be sure that his or her gun is safely locked away, or all hunters should be sure that their guns are safely locked away. Before we conclude this lecture, let's quickly review what we've learned so far. A pronoun is a word that can stand in for a noun. However, pronouns can also stand in for other pronouns. For instance, anyone could be an antecedent for the term he or she, which could be the pronoun. As with subjects and verbs, pronouns and antecedents must agree. If we have a singular antecedent, we must have a singular pronoun. And if we have a plural antecedent, we must have a plural pronoun to agree with it. After watching this lecture, hopefully you have a better idea of how to find pronoun antecedent agreement issues and also how to fix them.